The village of Elmwood slumbered beneath a quilt of mist that never truly lifted, a place where time dripped like sap from ancient oaks, and Harold Thistlewaite, a man whose bones creaked in harmony with his rocking chair, began each day at precisely 5:30 with the ritual of boiling water for tea. The kettle, older than Harold's 67 years, whistled a tuneless dirge as dawn's grey fingers crept across fields choked with thistles and wild rye. Harold measured 3 spoonfuls of Earl Grey into a chipped porcelain pot, his movements as deliberate as a tortoise crossing a desert, while outside, the world remained stubbornly still. No birds sang, no wind rustled the hedgerows, only the distant, hollow clang of the church bell marking another indistinguishable hour. His cottage, crouched at the edge of the moor, smelled perpetually of damp wool and dust, its shelves sagging under ledges chronicling rainfall, 3 inches in April, 2 3/4 in May, and the slow decay of fence posts along the eastern pasture. Harold sipped his tea, the liquid lukewarm and bitter, as he contemplated the day's sole event, mending a hole in the chicken coop where a determined fox had nosed its way in. The wire mesh lay in a rusty tangle by the back door, and Harold's knuckles ached at the thought of twisting it into place. He sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering on stone, and shuffled toward the task, pausing to watch a spider painstakingly rebuild its web between the lintel and the wall, a project, he mused, as futile as his own. Chapter 2. The chicken coop repair stretched into mid-morning, each twist of wire requiring Harold to stop, massage his arthritic fingers, and squint at the clouds, a monotonous procession of ash-grey puffs that promised rain but delivered only a damp, clinging chill. By the time the last strand was secured, his back protested with sharp jabs, and he retreated to the kitchen for a lunch of boiled potatoes and yesterday's bread, chewing slowly, the silence broken only by the metronomic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. Afternoon found him in the garden, where rows of cabbages grew stunted and pale, their leaves nibbled by unseen pests. Harold knelt, the soil cool and clammy beneath his trousers, and began weeding with a trowel whose handle had long ago worn smooth. He worked methodically, uprooting dandelions and chickweed, his mind adrift in a fog of half-formed memories, a childhood spent chasing sheep through these same fields, his father's voice admonishing him to hurry along, though haste had never suited Harold. The sun, a bleary eye behind the clouds, dipped lower, casting elongated shadows that merged with the gathering twilight. When Mrs. Gable from the neighboring farm trudged past the gate, her wheelbarrow laden with turnips, Harold merely nodded, sparing no energy for conversation. She vanished down the lane, her footsteps swallowed by the mist, and Harold remained, plucking one stubborn weed after another until his knees stiffened and the light failed completely. Chapter 3. Dusk settled over Elmwood like a moth-eaten blanket, and Harold retreated indoors, lighting a single oil lamp that pulled weak amber light on the scarred kitchen table. He prepared a supper of tinned beans and boiled cabbage, the meal eaten in silence while rain began its familiar patter against the window panes, a soft, relentless rhythm that blurred the hours. After washing his plate and spoon with painstaking thoroughness, Harold settled by the hearth, though no fire burned. Coal was dear, and the chill was a companion he'd long accepted. Instead, he opened the Compendium of British Lichens, a tome as thick as his forearm, its pages brittle and foxed. He read aloud in a murmur, each Latin name, Cladonia rangiferina, Xanthoria parietina, rolling off his tongue like an incantation meant to ward off the encroaching night. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming on the roof and gurgling in the gutters, a sound so pervasive it seeped into his bones. Harold's eyelids grew heavy, the words swimming before him, the apothecia elecanorine, with a thalline margin, and he drifted, not into sleep, but into a waking dream of moss-covered stones and endless, dripping forests. The clock struck 9, then 10, each chime a dull blow to the stillness. At 11:30, he marked his place with a dried oak leaf and rose, joints cracking like gunshots in the silence, to bank the stove's embers and secure the bolts on doors that hadn't seen a visitor in years. Chapter 4. Night deepened, and Harold lay in his narrow bed, the mattress lumpy as undercooked porridge, listening to the house settle around him, a groan of timber, a skittering in the walls, mice, or perhaps just his imagination, the eternal sigh of the wind in the chimney. Sleep eluded him, as it often did, replaced by a procession of trivial worries. Had he latched the chicken coop properly? Would the cabbages survive the slugs? He counted raindrops sliding down the window, each one a bead on an abacus tallying the hours until dawn. Somewhere in the village, a dog barked once, a sound swallowed instantly by the fog. Harold shifted, the coarse wool blanket scratching his chin, and recalled the summer of '58, when the river had swollen and flooded Old Man Henderson's hayfield, a minor catastrophe that had passed into local legend for its sheer inconvenience. Nothing of consequence ever happened in Elmwood. Even disasters were muted, forgettable. The darkness pressed close, thick and velvety, and Harold's breathing slowed, matching the drip 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 from the leaky tap in the kitchen sink. He thought of the spider rebuilding its web, of lichens clinging to gravestones, of time eroding everything to dust. Just as exhaustion finally dragged him toward oblivion, a branch scraped against the roof, a sound like fingernails on slate, and he jolted awake, heart thudding dully. The clock struck 3. Chapter 5. Morning arrived sodden and sullen, the mist now a downpour that turned the lane to mud. Harold, dressed in the same brown trousers and frayed cardigan he'd worn the day before, boiled water for tea, and stared out the window at the drowned world. The chicken coop stood intact, though rain had pulled in the dented roof, and the cabbages drooped, their roots likely waterlogged. After breakfast, tea, bread, a wrinkled apple, Harold donned his waxed coat and hat, the brim shedding rivulets as he ventured out to inspect the garden. Mud sucked at his boots, and his breath hung in ghostly plumes before him. He prodded a cabbage with his boot, limp, lifeless, and sighed. There would be no weeding today. Instead, he retreated to the shed, a ramshackle lean-to smelling of mildew and engine oil, and began sorting a crate of rusty nails by size, a task he'd abandoned months prior. The rhythmic clink-clink of metal against metal filled the damp air, a counterpoint to the rain's steady thrum. Hours bled away as Harold sorted, polished, and discarded, his mind blissfully blank. When the church bell tolled noon, he emerged, blinking, into a world unchanged. The rain still fell, the mist still clung, and Elmwood remained, as always, suspended in a limbo of quiet decay. Back inside, he warmed yesterday's potatoes over the stove, ate without tasting, and contemplated the afternoon's only diversion, darning socks by the cold hearth. The grandfather clock's pendulum swung back and forth, a hypnotic metronome measuring the slow, inevitable crawl toward nightfall. Chapter 6. The darning of socks occupied Harold through the long, watercolor gray afternoon, each stitch a tiny rebellion against entropy as he worked the coarse wool with a bone needle, his spectacles perched precariously on the bridge of his nose. The socks, riddled with thin patches and small holes like worm-eaten apples, lay heavy in his lap, the damp wool scent mingling with the pervasive odor of whetstone and wood smoke that clung to the cottage walls. Rain continued its symphony against the slate roof, a drone so constant it became the very texture of silence, punctuated only by the occasional blink of a drop escaping the stewpot placed beneath the kitchen's persistent leak. Harold's fingers moved with slow, mechanical precision, pulling the thread taut, looping it, securing another frayed edge against dissolution. His thoughts drifted to Mrs. Gable's turnips. Had hers fared better in this deluge? But the question dissolved as quickly as it formed, leaving no ripple. When the light grew too dim to distinguish grey thread from grey wool, he set the mending aside, lit the single lamp once more, and opened the lichen compendium to the page marked by the oak leaf. Peltigera canina, *, he murmured, tracing the etching of the dog lichen's leathery lobes, often found on damp, shaded soil or mossy rocks, the words blurred, their Latin certainty a frail raft on the sea of encroaching night. He read the same sentence 3 times, the meaning slipping away like water through cupped hands, until the grandfather clock's single, resonant chime for 6 o'clock startled him. Supper was a silent reprise of tinned kidney beans, eaten standing by the cold stove, the rain now a solid curtain obscuring the window entirely. He washed the tin plate and spoon under a trickle of icy water from the pump, dried them with a threadbare towel, and returned them to their precise place on the dresser shelf. The ritual complete, he banked the stove's faint embers with a few nuggets of precious coal and climbed the creaking stairs to bed, the damp already seeping into the blankets before he even lay down. Chapter 7. Sleep, when it finally came, was thin and fitful, populated by formless dreams of sinking into cold, peaty water or endlessly sorting nails that multiplied like maggots in the shed crate. Harold woke not to the alarm clock he never set, but to the profound, saturated stillness that follows a night of heavy rain. Dawn revealed a world drowned, the lane was a brown river, the chicken coop stood islanded in a moat of mud, and the cabbages were reduced to slimy, flattened rags against the soil. A profound weariness settled in Harold's bones, heavier than the damp wool blanket. He dressed mechanically, the frayed cardigan sleeves catching on his rough knuckles, and descended to the kitchen. The ritual of tea-making felt like lifting stones. The kettle's whistle sounded more plaintive than usual, a thin wail swallowed by the sodden air. He sipped the lukewarm Earl Grey, its bitterness accentuated by the metallic tang of rainwater that had somehow infiltrated the kettle. There would be no garden work today, no co-op inspection. The sheer, waterlogged inertia of the world outside mirrored the inertia within him. He spent the morning meticulously cleaning the single kitchen window with vinegar and a scrap of newspaper, rubbing away the grime and condensation until the pane revealed only the blurred, dripping vista of the drowned garden and the leaden sky beyond. Each circular motion of his cloth was an act of profound resignation. Lunch was skipped, the thought of food seemed alien. Instead, he sat in his rocking chair by the cold hearth, the lichen book unopened on his lap, and watched a single, waterlogged sparrow huddle on the fence post, its feathers plastered dark against its small body. It didn't sing, it didn't move, it simply existed, a tiny monument to endurance in the downpour. Harold rocked, slowly, the chair's rhythmic creak merging with the drip from the leak into the stewpot, a duet of persistence in a world determined to dissolve. Chapter 8. The afternoon bled into evening without demarcation, the light fading from pewter to charcoal without the intervention of sun or stars. Harold lit the oil lamp earlier than usual, the small flame struggling against the oppressive gloom. The silence, now that the rain had slackened to a persistent drizzle, felt thick, muffled, like wool packed in the ears. He attempted to return to the sock darning, but the needle felt clumsy in his stiff fingers, the wool stubbornly resistant. Giving up, he opened the drawer of the scarred kitchen table and withdrew a small, cedarwood box, its surface polished smooth by generations of handling. Inside lay a collection of utterly mundane treasures, a smooth, white quartz pebble found on the moor path decades ago, a single, tarnished brass button from his father's long-discarded coat, a brittle, pressed harebell flower, its blue faded to a memory of color, and a folded, yellowed map of Elmwood Parish from 1923. Harold unfolded the map with infinite care, spreading its crackling surface on the table under the lamplight. He traced the faded ink lines with a calloused fingertip, the meandering course of Sallow Brook, the boundaries of long consolidated fields, the cluster of cottages marked Thistlewaite near the moor's edge. Names sprang from the past: Parson's Meadow, Cobbler's Wood, all places unchanged in essence but altered irrevocably by time's slow erosion. He found the spot where he'd caught his first trout at age 10, the bend where Old Man Henderson's haycart had overturned in '58. The map was a palimpsest of inconsequential history. He studied it not with nostalgia, but with the detached focus of an archivist cataloging dust. The clock chimed 8, then 9. The drizzle whispered against the window. Harold refolded the map along its ancient creases, returned it to the box with the pebble, the button, the ghost of a flower, and closed the lid on the past as easily as he closed the drawer. The present demanded nothing more than enduring the night. Chapter 9. The silence of the waterlogged night pressed in, heavier than before. Harold lay in bed, the mattresses lumps familiar adversaries, listening to the new symphony of drips, the insistent asterisk plink asterisk into the stewpot, a slower plonk asterisk from a new leak near the chimney breast, the gurgle of overflowing gutters outside. His mind, usually a blank slate at this hour, presented an unwelcome clarity. He calculated the remaining coal, perhaps 2 weeks' worth if used sparingly. He inventoried the larder, tinned beans, 7 potatoes, a diminishing sack, some sprouting eyes, flour, low, tea, adequate. He thought of the ruined cabbages, the sodden ground, the relentless grey. A flicker of something akin to unease, but too dulled by habit to be fear, stirred in his chest. What if the rain didn't stop? What if the lane became impassable, cutting Elmwood off even more completely than usual? He dismissed the thoughts as fanciful, unworthy of his years. Elmwood endured. It always had. It was built on endurance, like the lichen on the gravestones. He focused instead on the rhythmic dripping, trying to count the intervals between asterisk plink and plonk asterisk, but the patterns shifted, eluding order. Outside, a sudden, sharp crack asterisk echoed through the muffled air, a waterlogged branch succumbing to its own weight, perhaps. Harold tensed, waiting for a follow-up sound, a sign of something more. None came. Only the dripping resumed, louder now, or so it seemed. The cold seeped deeper into the blankets. He pulled them tighter, up to his chin, the rough wool scratching his stubble. He thought of the sparrow again, huddled on its post. Had it flown? Had it simply ceased? The questions dissolved into the wet, woolen silence. Sleep, when it arrived, was not a release, but a slow submersion into the same chill, featureless murk that surrounded the cottage. Chapter 10. Morning light, filtering through the grimy window, revealed a world still weeping, though the downpour had lessened to a steady, mournful drizzle. Harold rose, the familiar ache in his joints a grounding constant. The air in the cottage felt denser, colder, the damp having seeped into the very plaster. He performed the tea ritual, the motions ingrained deeper than thought. The Earl Grey tasted faintly of peat today, the moor's essence brewed into his morning cup. Peering out, he saw the chicken coop still stood, a forlorn sentinel in its muddy moat. The cabbages were definitively gone, their location marked only by a darker patch of slick, black earth. A sense of profound vacancy settled over the garden, over Harold himself. There was nothing to mend, nothing to weed, nothing to sort. The day stretched before him, an expanse of wet, undifferentiated time. After mechanically consuming his bread and the last wrinkled apple, he pulled on his waxed coat and hat, the stiff fabric cold against his neck. He didn't go to the garden or the co-op. Instead, he walked slowly around the perimeter of his cottage, his boots sinking into the saturated earth. He noted the new leak staining the kitchen wall inside, the sagging gutter spout pouring water directly onto the foundation stones, the way the moss seemed greener, thicker, on the north-facing wall. He stopped at the back door, looking out towards the endless, mist-shrouded moor. The path was invisible, swallowed by the grey. He stood there for a long time, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, soaking his shoulders, his gaze fixed on the nothingness. No thought of lichen, no memory of maps, no calculation of supplies occupied him. There was only the rain, the cold, the damp wool smell, and the vast, patient silence of the moor, waiting. Eventually, numb with cold, he turned and shuffled back inside, leaving wet footprints on the flagstones that would slowly fade, like everything else, into the damp. The grandfather clock began its laborious count towards noon, each chime a droplet falling into an infinite, silent pool. Chapter 11. The damp footprints Harold left on the flagstones slowly evaporated into the chill air, leaving only faint, salty outlines that vanished entirely by mid-morning, a process he observed while slowly consuming another cup of lukewarm, peat-tinged tea. The drizzle outside persisted, a veil of fine moisture that seemed less like rain and more like the air itself condensing into droplets on every surface, the fence posts, the sagging clothesline, the stoic back of Mrs. Gable's lone shower horse glimpsed occasionally through the shifting mist across the waterlogged field. With the cabbages obliterated and the chicken coop secured against an indifferent fox, Harold found himself adrift in the expanse of the day. He decided, after an hour of rocking and staring at the perpetual grey beyond the window, to inventory the larder properly. Methodically, he removed each item: the diminishing sack of potatoes, now visibly sprouting pale, questing tendrils, the 7 tins of beans, 3 kidney, 4 butter, the half sack of flour, weevils visible at the bottom, the dwindling tea caddy, a jar of pickled beetroot from 2 summers past, its contents an unsettling purple-black, a small crock of hardened lard, and a solitary onion, papery skin clinging to its shrunken form. He noted it all in his rainfall ledger, repurposing the margins: potatoes, 12 pounds, est, sprouting; flour, 3 pounds, approximately; weevils; beans, 7 tins; beetroot, 1 jar, 63. Asterisk the act of writing, the scratch of pencil on paper, filled 20 minutes. The rest of the morning dissolved into polishing the already clean kitchen window again, the vinegar smell sharp and temporary in the damp, his reflection in the glass a pale, blurred spectre superimposed over the drowned garden. When the church bell tolled noon, its sound dampened and distant, he ate 2 cold boiled potatoes, their blandness a comfort against the creeping chill that no amount of wool seemed to dispel. The afternoon stretched before him, vast and empty as the moor itself. Chapter 12. The grandfather clock's pendulum swung, marking seconds that felt like hours in the waterlogged silence. Harold, seeking occupation beyond the window or the ledger, remembered the loose hinge on the cupboard beneath the stairs, a minor irritation that had persisted for months. He gathered his small, rust-speckled toolbox, the metal cold to the touch, and knelt on the flagstones, the dampness immediately seeping through his trousers. The hinge screws were stubborn, their slots worn smooth by time and damp. Harold's fingers, stiff and aching, struggled to gain purchase. He applied a drop of precious lamp oil, waited, tried again. The screwdriver slipped, scraping his knuckle, drawing a bead of dark blood that welled slowly before he sucked it away, the taste metallic and faint. After 30 minutes of patient, futile effort, punctuated by the rhythmic drip plink asterisk from the stew pot and a new, slower tap tap asterisk from the ceiling near the cold hearth, he conceded defeat. The hinge remained loose. He returned the tools to their box, wiped the smudge of oil from the flagstone with a damp rag, and sat heavily in his rocking chair. The lichen compendium lay beside him, but he lacked the focus for Latin names. Instead, he watched dust motes drift in the weak lamplight, stirred by his movements into a lethargic dance. They settled as slowly as his thoughts. He recalled the map in the cedarwood box, the bend in Sallow Brook where he'd caught the trout. The memory held no warmth, only the image of cold, clear water slipping over smooth stones, a stark contrast to the murk outside. The clock chimed 4. The light faded earlier now, the days shrinking imperceptibly towards winter. Harold rose, lit the lamp though it was scarcely dusk, and began the slow ritual of preparing supper: 2 tins of butter beans, warmed in a small pan, eaten without haste while the shadows deepened and the rain's whisper became the dominant sound once more in the world. Chapter 13. Night arrived with its usual damp embrace, the darkness outside absolute, pressing against the cottage windows like a physical weight. Harold banked the stove with the utmost care, using only 3 small nuggets of coal, watching the faint orange glow beneath the ash as if it held the secret to warmth. He ascended the creaking stairs, each step a small protest of wood, and lay beneath the coarse blankets. Sleep was a distant shore. The dripping orchestra played its nightly suite, the asterisk blink asterisk in the stew pot, the tap tap asterisk near the hearth, a new, intermittent drip drip asterisk from the corner of the bedroom ceiling where a stain was darkening the plaster. Harold counted them, trying to find a pattern, a rhythm to latch onto, but they remained stubbornly asynchronous, a chorus of entropy. The unease he'd felt the previous night returned, not sharp, but a dull pressure behind his ribs. The coal, the flour, the relentless wet. He envisioned the lane, a river of mud, cutting off Elmwood. He thought of Mrs. Gable. Had she ventured out? Had her turnips survived? The questions were pointless, he knew. Survival was solitary here. A sudden, heavier thump asterisk sounded on the roof, followed by a scrabbling sound, likely a waterlogged branch finally giving way, or perhaps a badger dislodged from its set. Harold held his breath, listening. Silence resumed, broken only by the dripping. He exhaled slowly, the sound loud in the stillness. The cold deepened. He pulled the blankets tighter, tucking them under his chin, the wool scratchy against his skin. He focused on the image of the dog lichen, Peltigera canina asterisk, its leathery lobes pressed against damp, shaded earth. Clinging, enduring. Slowly, the image blurred, the drips merged into a formless drone, and he sank not into sleep, but into a state of numb suspension, aware of the cold and the wet and the passing hours, yet detached, like a stone in the brook. Chapter 14. Morning unveiled another iteration of grey, the sky a seamless sheet of lead, the ground a tapestry of mud and sodden grass. Harold dressed with a sense of weary repetition, the frayed cardigan smelling faintly of mildew and old tea. The ritual of boiling water felt heavier, the kettle's whistle a thin, exhausted sound. As he sipped the weak, tepid Earl Grey, the peat flavor more pronounced today, he noticed the new stain on the bedroom ceiling had spread overnight, a dark, amoebic bloom on the plaster. Another leak. He sighed, the breath barely fogging the cold air. Repairing it would require fetching the ladder from the shed, braving the mud, wrestling with possibly rotted tiles, a prospect that made his aching joints throb in anticipation. He postponed it. Instead, after the meager breakfast of dry bread scraped with a smear of lard, he donned his waxed coat and hat. Not to inspect damage, but to simply be asterisk outside, to feel the insistent drizzle on his face, a confirmation of existence beyond the damp walls. He stood on the small stone step by the back door, the mud sucking greedily at the edges of his boots. The moor was invisible, swallowed whole by the mist. The air smelled of wet earth, decaying leaves, and a profound, mineral stillness. He watched the water drip from the brim of his hat onto the already saturated ground. Minutes passed, marked only by the patter of rain on his coat and the distant, hollow call of a crow lost in the grey. There was no epiphany, no solace, only the sheer, indifferent weight of the weather. His shoulders grew damp beneath the waxed cotton. His toes grew numb. Eventually, the chill bit deep enough to override inertia. He turned, shuffled back inside, leaving the door open for a moment, letting the wet, cold air flood the kitchen before closing it firmly against the world. The contrast made the cottage feel marginally less damp, but no warmer. He spent the remainder of the morning meticulously cleaning and oiling his few tools, a futile gesture against rust in this atmosphere, but the smooth, repetitive motions offered a semblance of purpose. Chapter 15. The afternoon found Harold attempting a task he'd avoided for years, sorting through a crate of old, mildewed books stored beneath the stairs, remnants of a great-aunt's bequest. The damp had warped the covers and fused many pages together. The smell of decayed paper and mold filled the cramped space. He sat on a low stool, the cold from the flagstones rising through his trousers, and began the slow process of separation. Some pages tore with a soft, despairing sound. Others resisted, glued by time and dampness into solid blocks. He salvaged little, a water-stained collection of hymns, a crumbling almanac from 1911, its predictions for harvest long irrelevant, and a novel titled The Vicar's Dilemma *, its plot obscured by foxing. And swollen pages. He piled the unsalvageable volumes, mostly sermons and agricultural treatises, near the back door for eventual burning, though the thought of lighting a fire large enough to consume them seemed extravagant. The salvageable few he wiped carefully with a dry cloth and placed on a higher shelf, knowing he'd likely never open them. The work was slow, messy, and ultimately meaningless, yet it filled the hours. The lamplight, lit early again against the pervasive gloom, flickered over his bent shoulders as he worked. Dust, disturbed from its long slumber, danced in the beam. He paused only when the church bell tolled 5, a sound that seemed to emanate from the heart of the mist itself. His back protested as he straightened. His fingers were stained with mildew and grime. He washed them under the icy pump water, the chill sharp and bracing. Supper was another tin of beans, eaten while standing at the kitchen table, watching the last vestiges of grey light bleed from the sky beyond the perpetually clean window. The pile of ruined books by the door loomed like a small, sodden monument. He banked the stove, the 3 new coal nuggets catching reluctantly, offering a whisper of heat against the encroaching chill of the night. The drips continued their patient song. Plink, tap tap, drip drip. Harold climbed the stairs, each creak a familiar note in the cottage's nightly lament, and sought the numb suspension of his damp bed once more. The stain on the ceiling seemed darker in the gloom. Chapter 16. The rain softened to a persistent mist overnight, a spectral veil clinging to Elmwood as Harold descended to the kitchen, the chill deeper than before, seeping into the marrow. The stain on the bedroom ceiling had widened, its edges weeping a slow, clear bead that traced a glistening path down the wall to pool on the floorboards, a new, rhythmic plop * joining the nocturnal chorus. Ignoring it felt impossible. Fixing it felt Herculean. He drank his tea, now tasting unmistakably of the moor's peat, as if the land itself was steeping in his cup, and stared at the pile of mildewed books by the back door. Birmingham required dry fuel, a commodity rarer than optimism. Instead, he dragged the crate outside into the drizzle, the mud sucking at his boots, and stacked the ruined volumes beside the overflowing rain barrel, a sodden monument to decay. The act left him breathless, his back a knot of protest. The rest of the morning vanished into the meticulous cleaning of his spectacles, polishing the lenses with the hem of his cardigan until the world beyond the window, though still blurred by rain and mist, regained a fraction of its dismal clarity. The drowned cabbages now mere dark smudges, the chicken coop a huddled, grey shape in the haze. Lunch was skipped again, the lard jar scraped clean yesterday. He boiled a single potato, ate it plain, its bland starchiness a dull anchor in the watery void of the day. The afternoon demanded occupation. He retrieved the cedarwood box, not for the map, but for the smooth white quartz pebble. He sat at the table, rolling it between his thumb and forefinger, the cool, unyielding surface a counterpoint to the pervasive damp. He traced the phantom curve of Sallow Brook across the worn wood grain, remembering not the trout, but the cold numbness of his boyhood hands in the water. The pebble absorbed no warmth from his touch. The clock chimed 3, a sound muffled by the wet air. Chapter 17. Silence, thick and damp as wet wool, settled heavily after the clock's chime. Then, cutting through it with startling clarity, the distant, resonant toll of the church bell. Not the measured marking of the hour, but a single, deep, prolonged bong * that hung vibrating in the saturated air. Harold's hand stilled, the quartz pebble cold in his palm. He listened, straining. Nothing followed. No second toll. No alarm. Just that one, profound note swallowed by the mist. Mrs. Gable. Some mishap on the flooded lane. He rose, shuffled to the front window, wiping a patch clear on the fogged pane. The lane was empty, a ribbon of mud vanishing into grey oblivion. The bell's echo lingered in his mind, a question without an answer. He waited, motionless, for minutes that stretched like hours. No sound of carts, no shouts, no second bell. Just the eternal drip plink * from the kitchen, the new plop * from upstairs, the whisper of drizzle. The silence reasserted itself, heavier now, pregnant with the unspoken implication of the solitary bell. A death, a summoning lost in the fog. He would likely never know. News traveled slowly in Elmwood, often not at all if the lanes were bad. He returned to the table, pocketed the pebble, its weight a small, cold comfort. The lichen compendium lay open at * Peltigera canina, often found on damp, shaded soil, * he read the words but absorbed nothing. The single bell toll reverberated in his skull, a punctuation mark in the unending sentence of the rain. He spent the remaining daylight hours sitting perfectly still in his rocking chair, watching the light fade from the window, the image of the bell tower, swallowed by mist, its sound a lonely protest against the silence, imprinted behind his eyes. Chapter 18. Nightfall brought no relief from the chill or the damp, only a deepening of the shadows and a slight intensification of the drizzle's whisper against the roof. Harold banked the stove with 2 miserly nuggets of coal, the glow barely perceptible. The solitary bell toll haunted the edges of his thoughts, a discordant note in the monotonous symphony of dripping water. Upstairs, the plop asterisk from the ceiling stain seemed louder, more insistent, marking time in the darkness. He lay in bed, the blankets damp despite his body heat, listening. Beyond the drips, the house settled with its usual groans, but tonight, they seemed watchful. The scrape of a branch on the roof, a sound he'd dismissed before, now felt deliberate, probing. The skittering in the walls, assumed mice, sounded heavier, slower. Rats, asterisk the thought, unwelcome and sharp, pierced the fog of his resignation. Damp attracted vermin. Rotting floorboards offered entry. He pictured them, sleek and dark, gnawing at the flour sack, contaminating his meager stores. The coal. They might nest in the coal scuttle. A tremor, unrelated to cold, passed through him. He strained his ears, every drip magnified, every creak a potential footfall. Was that a rustle near the cupboard under the stairs? A faint scratching behind the bedroom wall? Imagination, fed by the eerie bell and the relentless wet, conjured shapes in the absolute blackness. He held his breath. Silence, thick and listening, pressed in. Then, a distinct, dry asterisk scritch asterisk from the direction of the larder cupboard. His heart thudded once, a dull, heavy beat against his ribs. He lay frozen, the coarse wool blanket scratchy against his chin, the cold deepening around him, the unseen presence in the darkness suddenly the most real thing in his waterlogged world. Sleep was impossible. He counted drips, each plop asterisk a confirmation of decay, each imagined asterisk scritch a promise of invasion. Chapter 19. Dawn revealed nothing but more grey, more damp. Harold rose stiffly, the night's vigil etched in the bruised hollows under his eyes. The fear, sharp in the darkness, had receded with the feeble light, replaced by leaden exhaustion and a practical, grim resolve. Vermin. He pulled on his clothes, the fabric clammy, and descended to the kitchen. The first order, inspect the larder. He opened the cupboard door cautiously. The flour sack, already weevil-ridden, showed no obvious new tears. The potato sack seemed undisturbed. He moved the tins of beans, the jar of ancient beetroot. No droppings, no gnaw marks. Relief, thin and temporary, washed over him. Perhaps it had asterisk been imagination, or a mouse emboldened by the wet. But the possibility remained, a seed of unease planted in the fertile ground of decay. He performed the tea ritual with mechanical precision, the Earl Grey now tasting of peat and something faintly metallic, the roof. The kettle. After drinking half the cup, cold and bitter, he knew the ceiling leak could no longer be ignored. He wrestled the rickety wooden ladder from the shed, its rungs slick with algae, and maneuvered it through the back door, propping it precariously against the cottage wall beneath the spreading stain. The climb was slow, each step sending jolts through his knees. The roof tiles were slick, moss-covered, several cracked or missing near the apex where the leak originated. He could see the gap, a dark mouth exhaling dampness. Fixing it properly required new tiles, mortar, hope. He had none. Instead, he clambered down, his breath ragged, and retrieved a sheet of stiff, tarred felt left over from some forgotten repair. Wrestling it back up the ladder, fighting the drizzle and his own trembling, he managed to drape it over the worst section, weighing down the corners with the only heavy objects at hand, 3 large, mossy stones from the garden border. It was a shoddy patch, destined to fail. He descended, muscles quivering, and stood in the mud, looking up at his makeshift repair. It looked like what it was, a desperate gesture against the inevitable. The drizzle soaked through his hat, ran down his neck. The church bell remained silent. Chapter 20. The afternoon bled away in the wake of the futile roof repair. Harold sat at the kitchen table, a cold numbness spreading from his exhausted limbs into his mind. The damp footprints from his boots formed overlapping patterns on the flagstones, slowly evaporating. The quartz pebble lay on the table before him, a mute, white island on the scarred wood. He picked it up, rolled it. Smooth, cool, eternal, unlike the cottage, unlike himself. A profound sense of transience washed over him, as palpable as the damp. The lichen endured, the pebble endured, Elmwood endured, but only as a slow dissolution into the moor. Harold Thistlewaite was merely a temporary tenant in this process, a slightly more complex organism succumbing to the same wet entropy. He thought of the rats, real or imagined, gnawing in the dark. He thought of the single, unanswered bell. He thought of the peat in his tea, the stain on the ceiling, the pile of rotting books dissolving in the drizzle. There was no despair in this realization, only a vast, quiet acceptance, as deep and cold as the water table beneath the cottage. He opened the rainfall ledger. August 4th, *, he wrote, the pencil lead snapping halfway through the 4. He stared at the broken point, then slowly, deliberately, wrote below it, not numbers, but a single sentence, the rain continues. *, he closed the ledger. The light was failing. He did not light the lamp. He sat in the gathering gloom, the pebble a cold weight in his palm, listening to the water find its way through his inadequate patch, a new, hesitant drip * joining the chorus on the kitchen floor, a fresh insult in the symphony of decay. The grandfather clock, unwound and silent since the day before yesterday, offered no chime. Time, in Harold's cottage, was measured only by the falling water and the slow, sure crumbling of stone. Chapter 21. The new drip in the kitchen established itself with metronomic precision, a clear, cold beat falling from the edge of the tarred felt patch high above, striking the flagstone near the cold hearth with a soft, high-pitched tink. Harold observed it for a long while, seated in his rocking chair, the quartz pebble a cool, smooth presence in his clenched fist. He'd stopped counting the drips. Their rhythm was the cottage's pulse now, a slow bleed of time and structure. The silence outside felt denser than ever, the mist pressing like a wet shroud against the perpetually clean window. Mrs. Gable hadn't passed the gate. No wheelbarrow, no trudging footsteps. Had the single bell toll been for her? The thought surfaced, detached, and sank again into the murk of irrelevance. Elmwood absorbed its losses quietly. The day demanded occupation. He rose, joints protesting, and fetched the near-empty flour sack. Weevils clustered in the bottom folds, a slow, seething mass. Harold didn't flinch. He carefully poured the remaining flour, weevils and all, into a chipped bowl. Waste was impossible. He added water from the pump, its flow sluggish and icy, and began mixing a stiff, grey dough. The weevils became dark flecks, incidental protein. He shaped the dough into 4 flat, hard biscuits and placed them on the cold stove top. They wouldn't rise, wouldn't brown properly without sustained heat he couldn't afford. They would merely harden into edible stones. The task consumed the morning. At noon, he ate 1 biscuit immediately. It tasted of damp flour, grit, and a faint, earthy bitterness. He chewed slowly, methodically, washing each mouthful down with cold water. The remaining 3 sat on the stove like miniature, inedible landscapes. The afternoon stretched, vast and empty. He returned to the cedarwood box, tracing the outline of the brass button from his father's coat. The metal was dull, the shank rusted. He couldn't recall the coat's color, only the smell of pipe smoke and damp wool. He closed the box. The light was already failing. He lit the oil lamp early, its small flame guttering in a draught that seemed to seep from the very walls. He opened the lichen compendium, not reading, just turning the brittle pages, listening to the orchestra of drips, the asterisk plink, the plop asterisk, the tink asterisk, the slow drip drip asterisk from upstairs. The words swam, saw radiate, Isidia, lobes asterisk, meaningless syllables against the encroaching dark and the gnawing cold in his bones. Chapter 22. A thin layer of ice glazed the rain barrel overnight, a fragile, transient skin shattered by the next wave of drizzle. Harold woke to the profound silence of the unwound grandfather clock. Its stillness was more unnerving than any chime. Time was now measured solely by the creeping grey at the window and the insistent percussion of water. He descended the stairs, the cold air biting through his layers. The biscuits on the stove were rock hard, impervious. He soaked one in a cup of lukewarm tea, waiting for it to soften into a sodden, gritty paste. The peat taste in the tea was overwhelming, as if he were drinking liquid moor. He ate the paste without expression. The larder inspection was brief, potatoes dwindling, sprouting vigorously, beans, 5 tins now, the beetroot jar, a relic. The flour sack lay empty, discarded near the pile of ruined books. He ventured outside, not for purpose, but to feel the drizzle on his skin, a confirmation of the world's persistent, indifferent wetness. The lane was a quagmire. He looked towards the invisible point where Mrs. Gable's farm should be. Nothing, only mist and the skeletal outline of a distant, leafless oak. His makeshift roof patch sagged under the weight of the mossy stones, a dark stain already spreading around its edges on the tarred felt. Failure was assured. He shuffled around the cottage perimeter. Again, the moss on the north wall was lusher, thicker, a vibrant green fur devouring the stone. Near the back step, he noticed the first pale, rubbery nubs pushing through the mud Cladonia pixidata, cup lichen. He knelt stiffly, ignoring the mud soaking into his knees, and touched one cool, fragile cup. Endurance. He left it undisturbed. Back inside, the cold was deeper. He banked the stove with the last 3 nuggets of coal, watching the tiny, reluctant glow. It offered no warmth, only a faint, smoky smell. He spent hours sitting at the table, the quartz pebble before him, staring at the perpetual twilight beyond the window. The silence was broken only once, a distant, echoing crack asterisk, like a great tree falling somewhere deep in the drowned woods. No one heard it but Harold. And the rain. Chapter 23. The rats revealed themselves that night. Not dramatically, but with a quiet, undeniable certainty. Harold lay awake, listening beyond the drips. First, a soft, persistent scrabbling asterisk inside the larder cupboard wall. Then, a distinct, dry gnawing asterisk sound near the potato sack. Not imagination. Real, methodical consumption. He lay perfectly still, the coarse blanket pulled taut beneath his chin. The fear was a cold, solid lump in his stomach, colder than the air. They were in the walls. They would find the beans. They would chew through everything. The gnawing asterisk paused. Silence. Then, a light, rapid pattering asterisk across the ceiling above him, tiny claws on plaster. They were exploring, claiming. He pictured them, sleek, dark, eyes glinting in the absolute black, tails whipping through the damp air. His cottage was no longer solely his. It was becoming habitat. He thought of the lichen on the step, the moss on the wall. The process was universal, nature reclaiming. He felt no anger, only a weary acknowledgement. When the gnawing asterisk resumed, closer now, perhaps near the leg of the dresser, he closed his eyes. Sleep was impossible. He focused on the tink asterisk in the kitchen, timing his breaths to its fall. Inhale, tink, exhale, tink. The gnawing became another instrument in the damp orchestra, a counterpoint to entropy. He drifted not into sleep, but into a state of detached observation, listening to his own shelter being slowly devoured around him, the boundaries between inside and outside, self and environment, dissolving like sugar in the relentless wet. Dawn brought no respite, only the confirmation of sound, fresh droppings, like tiny black seeds, near the potato sack. Chapter 24. The choice was stark, presented by the weak, grey light filtering onto the larder floor, defend the potatoes or lose them. Harold moved with a grim, mechanical purpose. He dragged the heavy potato sack into the center of the kitchen floor. He retrieved his small toolbox. Not for repair, for fortification. He selected the sturdiest, least rusted tin, the beetroot. He emptied its unsettling purple-black contents down the sink pump, the viscous liquid oozing reluctantly. He scrubbed the tin clean with icy water and sand until the metal gleamed dully. Next, he gathered every scrap of discarded wire from the chicken coop repair, rusty strands coiled like metallic snakes. He worked silently, his stiff fingers fumbling but persistent. He punched 2 small holes near the top rim of the beetroot tin using a nail and hammer, the tap-tap asterisk echoing sharply. He threaded a length of wire through the holes, creating a crude handle. He half-filled the tin with water from the pump. Then, he carefully placed it atop the potato sack, balancing it precariously. He took the remaining wire and fashioned a series of loose, tripwire loops around the base of the sack, connecting them ingeniously to the balancing tin. The mechanism was simple: a rat. Disturbing the wires would likely jostle the sack, upsetting the tin, dousing the intruder with cold water. A deterrent, not a killer. A pathetic barricade against inevitable consumption. He surveyed his work. It looked absurd, frail, pointless. Yet, the act of creation, however futile, had filled several hours. He ate another soaked biscuit, the grit grinding between his teeth. The drizzle thickened to rain again, drumming on the sagging roof patch. He sat in his chair, watching the contraction, waiting. The gnawing in the walls had ceased. For now, the silence felt expectant. The quartz pebble was warm in his pocket, polished smooth by hours of unconscious friction. Chapter 25. The rain fell with renewed vigor, a cascading roar on the roof that drowned the delicate tink asterisk and plop asterisk of the indoor drips, transforming them into mere vibrations felt through the soles. Water streamed down the window, obscuring the drowned world entirely. Harold's tin contraption stood guard over the potatoes, a silent sentinel in the gloom. He hadn't moved from his chair for hours, mesmerized by the violence of the downpour outside and the profound stillness within, broken only by the deep, guttural gurgle of water overflowing the gutters and the occasional, ominous creak from the roof timbers under the weight of water. The light never truly brightened. Midday was indistinguishable from dawn. Hunger was a dull, persistent ache beneath the cold. He ate the third biscuit dry, the hardness challenging his warm teeth. He saved the last. The beans, 5 tins, felt like a treasure hoard now, a bulwark against the void. He thought about opening one, heating it over the dead stove. But the act felt premature, a surrender to the immediacy of the storm. He waited. The rats remained silent, perhaps wary of the new contraption, perhaps merely biding their time. He pulled the quartz pebble from his pocket, holding it up to the dim light filtering through the streaming window. It glowed faintly, milky white, impervious to the damp, the cold, the decay. A fragment of permanence. He thought of Sallow Brook, how its clear, cold water would be a raging torrent now, carving new paths through the ancient moor. He thought of the church, its bell tower standing sentinel in the mist, its single, unanswered toll hanging forever in the saturated air. He thought of Mrs. Gable, swallowed by the grey. The rain roared, a white noise that filled his skull, washing away thought, leaving only sensation. The cold, the hard pebble in his palm, the ache in his joints, the vibration of the deluge through the cottage bones. He closed his eyes, not sleeping, but dissolving into the sound, a stone in the torrent, smooth, cold, and enduring, while the world dissolved around him into liquid grey. Chapter 26. The roar of the rain subsided eventually, settling back into the familiar, weary drizzle, leaving the cottage shuddering with residual drips that seemed louder in the sudden relative quiet, the tink asterisk in the kitchen now a sharp counterpoint to the deeper plop asterisk from upstairs and the wet gurgle outside the walls. Harold unfolded stiffly from his chair, the quartz pebble slipping from his lax grip to thud softly on the rug. Hunger, a cold, hollow fist, clenched beneath his ribs. He shuffled to the potato sack fortress. The beetroot tin sat askew, water sloshing precariously within. The trip wires lay undisturbed. A flicker of something akin to victory, cold and small, sparked in his chest. He nudged the sack with his boot. It felt lighter, too light. Heart thudding a slow, heavy beat against his sternum, he crouched, ignoring the protest of his knees, and loosened the sack's rough neck. The smell that rose wasn't earthy potato, but damp burlap and something else, a musky, feral odor. He peered inside. Gnawed remnants, pale and shredded, littered the bottom. The rats hadn't tripped the wires. They'd chewed a hole through the burlap from underneath, feasting unseen in the dark while Harold watched his pathetic sentinel. Only a few small, mangled tubers remained, sprouting white tendrils like desperate fingers in the gloom. The hollow fist of hunger tightened, squeezing the air from his lungs. He carefully extracted the least damaged potato, its skin marred by sharp, parallel grooves. No point in soaking it now. He wiped the mud and rat spore from its surface with his sleeve and bit into it raw. The flesh was cold, gritty, and tasted of earth and decay. He chewed mechanically, the sound loud in the dripping silence, staring at the violated sack, the useless tin trap, the evidence of his shelter's capitulation to the inevitable. The quartz pebble, half hidden in the rugs pile, caught the weak light, smooth and indifferent. Chapter 27. The gnawed potato sat like a stone in Harold's stomach. The day stretched before him, formless and damp, the grey light leaching colour and purpose from the world. The rat droppings multiplied near the larder, bold black seeds scattered like punctuation marks declaring the dominion. He ignored them. He ignored the violated potato sack. He ignored the persistent, spreading stain on the kitchen ceiling where the tarred felt patch sagged like a defeated sail. Instead, he pulled on his waxed coat and hat, the stiff fabric heavy with absorbed moisture, and stepped out into the drizzle. The air was thick with the smell of saturated earth and rotting vegetation. He didn't look towards Mrs. Gable's vanished farm. He walked past the drowned garden, past the islanded chicken coop, towards the edge of his property where the moor began its indistinct rise into the mist. The ground was treacherous, sucking at his boots, hidden puddles soaking through to his socks. He stopped where the lichen grew thickest, Cladonia pixidata * forming pale, rubbery cups and * Peltigera canina * spreading leathery lobes like dark green maps across the mossy stones. He knelt, the cold mud seeping through his trousers, and began, with his bare, stiff fingers, to carefully pry large patches of moss and intertwined lichen from the stones and the sodden earth. It came away easily, roots shallow, clinging more to dampness than soil. He piled the cool, living carpet onto a piece of torn sacking, the green vibrant against the brown. It was slow, methodical work, the drizzle plastering his hair to his forehead, water running down his neck inside his collar. He worked without conscious purpose, driven only by the need to occupy his hands, to harvest something the rats wouldn't want. The silence of the moor was absolute, broken only by his own labored breathing and the whisper of drizzle on his coat. When the sacking was heavy with damp moss and lichen, he gathered the corners and dragged it back towards the cottage, leaving a dark, wet trail in the mud. Chapter 28. The moss and lichen lay in a glistening heap by the cold hearth, smelling of deep earth and ancient stone. Harold stared at it. What had he intended? Insulation. A poultice for the rotting cottage. It seemed absurd now, a pointless gathering of wet green things. The light was fading rapidly, the drizzle outside merging with the twilight. He lit the oil lamp, its flame struggling against the chill dampness that seemed to radiate from the pile of vegetation. Hunger gnawed, sharper now. The remaining gnawed potatoes were a last resort. The beans were finite. He opened a tin of butter beans, the metallic snick asterisk of the key piercing the quiet. He didn't heat them. The cold, slimy orbs, swimming in their viscous liquid, were eaten straight from the tin with his fingers, the taste bland and faintly metallic, the texture unsettling. Each swallow was an act of necessity, not sustenance. He licked the tin clean. 4 left. He placed the empty tin carefully beside the others near the sink, a small monument to depletion. Upstairs, The plop asterisk from the ceiling stain had accelerated, a steady beat now. He ascended the creaking stairs, the lamp casting long, wavering shadows. The stain was a dark continent on the ceiling, the plaster bulging ominously near its center. A constant stream of water fell into the chipped enamel bowl he'd placed beneath it, already half full. He emptied it out the bedroom window into the darkness, the water disappearing into the chorus of drips below. Back in bed, the coarse blankets offered no warmth. The silence was different tonight. Beyond the dripping orchestra, beyond the sighing wind in the chimney, he heard him again. Not just scrabbling or gnawing. A low, chittering sound. A rustle of many small bodies moving within the walls. Communicating. Thriving. The cold seeped deeper than his bones, into a place where resignation curdled into a quiet, icy dread. He clutched the quartz pebble, its smooth, unchanging coolness the only constant in the dissolving world. The chittering seemed to grow louder, filling the spaces between the drips. Chapter 29. Dawn revealed a new landscape within the cottage. Harold descended to find the pile of moss and lichen already graying at the edges, its vibrant green fading to a dismal olive in the weak light. A fungal smell, sweet and cloying, mingled with the damp wool and decay. He ignored it. He went to the potato sack fortress. The hole chewed from below was larger. The remaining gnawed tubers were gone. Only shredded burlap and a scattering of pale, sprouting eyes remained in the bottom. The rats had feasted in the night, unimpeded by his presence, his tin trap a forgotten relic. A profound emptiness opened within him, colder than the cottage air. He turned to the larder cupboard. The door hung slightly ajar. He pushed it open. Droppings littered the shelves. The sack of sprouting potatoes, pushed into the corner, showed fresh, ragged holes. He pulled it out. Light, too light. He upended it. A single, small, badly sprouted potato tumbled out, rolling across the flagstone before coming to rest against the leg of the table. His entire harvest. He picked it up. It was soft in spots, yielding under his thumb. He placed it carefully on the table beside the empty bean tins. 4 tins of beans, 1 rotten potato. The arithmetic was stark, inescapable. He boiled water for tea, the ritual now devoid of comfort, merely a mechanical response to habit. The Earl Grey tasted overwhelmingly of peat, thick and gritty on his tongue. He drank it standing by the window, watching the drizzle weave its endless grey tapestry. The moss heap by the hearth seemed to pulse faintly in the corner of his vision. He walked over to it. Tiny, white fruiting bodies, no larger than pinheads, had sprouted overnight on the decaying asterisk peltigera. Life feeding on decay. He picked up a handful of the cool, slimy moss. Without thought, he carried it upstairs. Standing on the stool beneath the bulging ceiling stain, he began packing handfuls of wet moss and lichen into the gap around the sagging tarred felt, stuffing the green matter into the dark wound in his roof. It was cold, messy, utterly futile. Water seeped through immediately, darkening the moss, dripping onto his hands. He packed more. The bulging plaster groaned softly under his touch. Chapter 30. The afternoon dissolved into a monochrome haze. Harold sat at the kitchen table, the rotten potato before him, the quartz pebble. Beside it, he had not eaten. The hollow fist of hunger had become a familiar, almost comforting ache, a counterpoint to the pervasive cold. The pile of stuffed moss upstairs dripped steadily, a new, organic squelch asterisk joining the plop asterisk in the bowl. Downstairs, the chittering within the walls was a constant, dry susurration, like dead leaves skittering in a tomb. He picked up the pebble, rolling it slowly between his thumb and forefinger. Its smoothness was absolute, its whiteness a stark accusation against the grime of the table, the grey of the world outside. He thought of the brook stone it once was, tumbled smooth by clear, cold water long before the peat stained everything. That water was gone, swallowed by the saturated moor, just as Elmwood was being swallowed. He closed his fist around the pebble, its cool solidity anchoring him in the dissolving present. He didn't open the last lichen compendium. He didn't look at the cedarwood box. He simply sat, listening to the symphony of decay, the drip plop squelch asterisk from above, the dry asterisk chitter scritch asterisk from the walls, the gurgle of overflowing water outside, the endless whisper of drizzle on the roof. Time, unwound by the silent grandfather clock, ceased to have meaning. The light didn't so much fade as thicken, congealing into the damp twilight. He didn't light the lamp. The darkness gathered around him, warm only in its totality, smelling of wet stone, rotting moss, and the musky presence of the unseen inhabitants claiming their share of the shelter. Harold remained motionless, a stone himself in the current, the quartz pebble a cold, hard nucleus of endurance in the center of his palm, while the cottage, and everything within it, slowly returned to the wet, patient earth. The rain continued its gentle, relentless tattoo on the roof, the only constant in a world quietly dissolving. Chapter 31. The darkness thickened around Harold, not as an absence but as a physical presence, cool and damp like the moss he'd stuffed into the ceiling, pressing against his skin with the weight of the sodden world outside. The chittering within the wall swelled and ebbed, a dry tide of tiny claws and gnawing teeth, punctuated by the wetter symphony of decay, the rhythmic plop asterisk into the bowl upstairs, the organic squelch asterisk of saturated moss compressing under its own weight within the ceiling cavity, the constant drip asterisk from multiple points in the kitchen below, and the low, wet gurgle of water finding new paths beneath the cottage flagstones. Hunger was a hollowed-out space inside him, no longer a fist but a vast, cold cavern echoing with the sounds of the dying house. He didn't move from the chair. The quartz pebble was a hard, smooth island in the sea of his palm, a point of reference in the dissolving dark. Time stretched and warped, measured only by the increasing sag of the ceiling plaster visible as a deeper black against the lesser blackness, a slow, groaning descent that seemed to pull the air down with it. He thought of the single rotten potato on the table, the soft yielding spots beneath its skin, the desperate white sprouts. Later, it could wait. The 4 tins of beans were a fortress yet unbreached, a final, dwindling redoubt. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen more intently, to map the progress of the unseen colony in the walls, their pathways expanding, converging, perhaps already tasting the dried wood lath beneath the bulging plaster above his head. The air grew colder, smelling sharply now of wet plaster, fungal decay from the moss heap downstairs, and the undeniable, musky scent of rodent. A faint, high-pitched squeaking joined the chittering, a sound that burrowed into his skull. He tightened his fist around the pebble, its cool permanence the only counterpoint to the relentless, consuming entropy. The rain outside remained a steady, muffled roar, the world reduced to water and dissolution. Chapter 32. Dawn was a rumor, a barely perceptible lightening of the oppressive grey beyond the streaming window. Harold unfolded stiffly, every joint protesting like unoiled hinges. The cavern of hunger yawned, demanding acknowledgement. He shuffled to the table, the flagstones icy beneath his thin socks. The rotten potato lay where he'd left it. He picked it up. It felt unpleasantly soft, yielding, a few sprouts broken off. He scraped the worst of the rot away with his thumbnail, revealing flesh the color of dirty water. He bit into it. The taste was overwhelmingly earthy, sour, with a faint sweetness of decay that lingered unpleasantly on his tongue. He chewed slowly, forcing down each gritty mouthful, washing it away with a dipper of cold, metallic-tasting water from the pump. It sat like a cold, alien weight in his gut. The 4 bean tins gleamed dully in the gloom. He touched one, the metal cold and reassuringly solid. Not yet. He turned his attention to the pile of moss and lichen by the hearth. Overnight, the decay had accelerated. The vibrant greens were now a uniform, slimy brownish black, the pinhead fruiting bodies collapsed into dark smudges, the fungal smell thick and cloying, like forgotten fruit. Yet, nestled within the rot, the *Peltigera canina * lobes, though darkened, still held their leathery shape. Enduring, he knelt, ignoring the icy dampness seeping into his knees from the stone, and carefully separated a few of the least decomposed *peltigera fronds from the putrid mass. They felt cool, rubbery, resilient. He rinsed them briefly under the trickle of the pump, the water shockingly cold on his hands. He placed one leathery lobe on his tongue. It tasted of wet stone, bitter earth, and an astringent tang. He chewed. It was fibrous, tough, requiring prolonged effort. It yielded no sustenance he could perceive, only a mouthful of cold, bitter grit. He swallowed. It was food only in the sense that it was matter ingested. He ate another. The process filled time, occupied his jaw. The hollow feeling remained. The chittering in the walls seemed momentarily louder, mocking. Chapter 33. The day dissolved into a watercolor wash of grey and damp cold. Harold sat by the cold hearth, the decaying moss heap a festering presence beside him. He had eaten 2 more *peltigera lobes. They sat like indigestible wads in his stomach, offering no warmth, only a lingering bitterness at the back of his throat. His gaze drifted upwards, drawn inevitably to the ceiling stain. It was larger, darker, the bulge more pronounced, stretching almost to the center of the room. As he watched, mesmerized by its slow expansion, a thin crack appeared in the plaster with a sound like tearing parchment. It spiderwebbed outwards from the apex of the bulge, fine white lines stark against the dark, damp stain. A small shower of plaster dust sifted down, sparkling faintly in the weak light before vanishing onto the flagstones. The plop asterisk into the bowl upstairs became faster, more urgent. A new sound joined the indoor symphony, a low, wet creak asterisk emanating from the ceiling joists, stressed under the combined weight of water, sodden moss, and decaying plaster. The chittering in the walls paused, then resumed with renewed intensity, as if sensing the imminent collapse of a barrier. Harold remained seated, the quartz pebble a hard pressure point in his clenched hand. He felt no urge to move the bowl, to shore up the failing structure. It was inevitable. The cottage was returning to the moor, molecule by molecule. He thought of the church bell's single, unanswered toll. He thought of Mrs. Gable, vanished into the mist. Had her roof succumbed first? Had the rats found her pantry sooner? The questions were as weightless as the plaster dust. He closed his eyes, focusing on the sounds, the tearing plaster, the accelerating plop asterisk, the wet creak asterisk, the dry skittering chitter, the drumming rain. They merged into a single, discordant hymn to dissolution. The cold deepened, seeping through his clothes, settling into his marrow. He ate another lichen lobe. Chapter 34. The crack in the ceiling widened overnight, a jagged black lightning bolt splitting the dark plaster. Harold woke to the sound of dripping water landing not in the bowl, but directly onto the flagstones near the foot of the stairs. The bowl had overflowed. A small, dark pool spread slowly across the stone, reflecting the meager grey light from the window. The bulge in the ceiling hung lower, visibly sagging, the plaster stretched taut and glistening with moisture. The wet creak asterisk was constant now, a background groan of protest from the overburdened timbers. He rose, his movements slow and brittle. He fetched the overflowing bowl from upstairs, the water icy cold against his fingers. He emptied it out the back door into the relentless drizzle. The moss stuffed around the tarred felt was a cold, black sludge, oozing water like a wound. He didn't attempt to add more. Downstairs, the pool on the flagstone was growing. He dropped an old rag onto it. It soaked through instantly, darkening. He left it there. Hunger was a distant ache, dulled by the lichen and the overwhelming cold. He opened a tin of beans. Kidney beans this time. He ate them cold, straight from the tin with his fingers, the slimy, bland orbs a small burst of recognizable sustenance amidst the decay. The metallic taste was almost comforting. 3 tins left. He placed the empty tin precisely with the others. The rats were audibly active in the larder cupboard now. He heard the distinct clatter asterisk of a tin being nudged. He walked slowly to the cupboard and pulled the door open. A small, dark shape darted from a shelf into a hole chewed near the floorboard. Droppings were everywhere. The sack of flour residue was torn open, weevils long gone. The remaining potatoes were vanished, only pale sprouts left in the burlap shreds. They'd breached the cupboard. The beans were next, or the cedarwood box, or him. He closed the cupboard door. It wouldn't matter. He returned to his chair by the hearth, the decaying moss heap emanating its sweet rot smell. He picked up the quartz pebble. It felt warmer, slightly, from the heat of his own dying metabolism. He stared at the widening crack in the ceiling, the dark water pooling below it. The chittering sounded triumphant. Chapter 35. The collapse happened slowly, then suddenly. Harold watched, detached, as the jagged crack in the ceiling yawned wider throughout the sodden afternoon. Plaster dust sifted down in continuous, fine streams. The wet creak asterisk became a tortured groan. Then, with a sound like a sodden sigh, a section of plaster the size of a dinner plate detached. It didn't fall, it slumped, hanging by fibrous laths for a suspended moment before dropping with a heavy, wet thud asterisk onto the rag-soaked flagstones below. A cascade of icy brown water followed, splattering onto the debris, spraying dark droplets across the floor. A ragged hole gaped in the ceiling, revealing the dark, dripping underside of the roof timbers, the sagging tarred felt patch, and the black, sodden mass of moss heap packed in. More water poured through, a steady brown stream now, adding to the expanding pool. Cold, damp air flooded down from the roof space, carrying the smell of wet rotten ancient dust. The chittering in the walls surged to a frenzy, excited by the sudden influx of space and cold air. Harold didn't flinch. He sat in his chair, the quartz pebble a hard, smooth focus in his palm. He watched the water fall. It was the moor claiming its own. The boundary between inside and outside, already porous, was dissolving. Rain dripped directly into his kitchen. The cold intensified, sharper now, cutting through his layers. He thought of the asterisk Cladonia pixidata asterisk cups outside, filling with rainwater. He thought of the dog lichen, Peltigera canina asterisk, clinging to stones in the downpour. Enduring, he ate the last of the salvaged lichen lobes, the bitterness now familiar, almost welcome. The pool spread towards his boots. He drew his feet up onto the chair rung. The hole in the ceiling dripped. The rats chittered. The rain drummed its unchanging rhythm on the roof, the only heartbeat left in the drowned world of Elmwood. Harold Thistlewaite, a stone in the stream, waited, the cold smoothness of the quartz the only truth he knew. Chapter 36. The brown water continued its steady cataract through the ruptured ceiling, pooling across the flagstones in a dark, expanding mirror that reflected the ragged hole above and Harold's hunched silhouette in the chair. The cold radiating from the breach was profound, a tangible force that seeped through wool and skin, settling deep into the core of him. The chittering in the walls had evolved. Now sharp, excited squeaks echoed directly from the newly exposed cavity above, accompanied by the frantic scratch of claws on wet wood lath. They were exploring the wound in his roof, claiming the high ground. Harold watched a droplet detach itself from a splintered timber edge, fall through the gloom, and strike the dark pool with a perfect, cold asterisk plink. The rhythm was hypnotic. He shifted the quartz pebble to his other palm, seeking the slight friction warmth of his skin against its eternal coolness. Hunger was a dull background hum, almost indistinguishable from the pervasive ache of cold. The 3 remaining bean tins sat on the dresser, a diminishing row of metallic sentinels. He thought of the metallic taste, the slippery texture. Later, he looked towards the decaying moss heap. Only a slick, black mound remained, its fungal fruiting collapsed into a fetid sludge. The Peltigera asterisk was gone, consumed. Only bitterness remained. He closed his eyes, listening to the symphony of dissolution. The water's asterisk plink plash asterisk, the rat's triumphant skittering above, the groan of overburdened timber, the eternal drumming rain on the roof. Time compressed and expanded. He was the pebble, smooth, cold, waiting. Chapter 37. Movement flickered at the edge of his vision. Harold turned his head slowly, stiffly. A rat, not in the walls, not above. Here, It emerged from the shadowed cavity beneath the stairs, sleek and dark, fur plastered damply to its lean body. It paused on the threshold of the kitchen, nose twitching, small black eyes glittering in the gloom, reflecting the weak grey light from the window. It wasn't large, but its presence in the open space was an obscene violation. It scuttled forward, low to the ground, heading directly for the expanding pool of brown water beneath the ceiling breach. It sniffed at the edge, lapped once, then darted towards the decaying moss heap, nosing the putrid sludge before recoiling slightly. Harold remained absolutely still, breath shallow, the quartz pebble a hard knot of reality in his fist. The rat's gaze swept the room, passing over him as if he were another piece of furniture, another damp feature of the decaying landscape. It focused on the dresser, on the tins. It moved with quick, confident jerks, climbing the rough wood grain of the dresser leg with surprising agility. It reached the shelf, sniffed along the base of the 3 remaining bean tins. Harold watched, a detached observer. The rat nosed the middle tin, its claws scraping lightly on the metal. Then, with a sudden, sharp movement, it bit down on the tin's rolled edge. The metallic screech asterisk tore through the damp air, sharp and shocking. The rat worried the edge, its teeth grating, seeking purchase. Harold didn't move. The sound was an assault, a declaration. The tin resisted. The rat paused, chittered softly, then leapt down, vanishing back beneath the stairs as swiftly as it had appeared. The screech echoed in Harold's bones long after the silence returned, broken only by the dripping water and the distant skittering above. The fortress was breached. The sentinels were under siege. He ate nothing. Chapter 38. The grey light that passed for day offered no warmth, only a marginally less oppressive darkness. Harold unfolded from the chair, his limbs protesting like rusted machinery. The pool covered half the kitchen floor now, icy water soaking into the rag he'd dropped days ago, rendering it a dark, sodden island. He stepped carefully around its edge, the cold biting through his thin socks. He went to the dresser. The 3 tins remained. The middle one bore distinct, parallel gouges in its metal near the rim, shiny scratches against the dull surface. The rat's declaration. He picked up the damaged tin. It felt heavier than hunger. He placed it back precisely. Not yet. He needed a distraction, a task. His gaze fell on the cedarwood box on the higher shelf. He took it down, the wood smooth and cool under his fingers. He opened it. The white quartz pebble, its twin, lay nestled beside the tarnished brass button, the brittle harebell ghost, and the folded map. He took his pebble from his pocket and placed it beside its sibling in the box. 2 fragments of permanence. He unfolded the map of Elmwood Parish, 1923. The paper crackled ominously. He spread it on the table, smoothing its fragile surface. Sallow Brook, Cobbler's Wood, Parson's Meadow. The cluster marked, Thistlewaite. He traced the faded lines with a fingertip numb with cold. The brook would be a torrent. The wood, drowned. The meadow, a swamp. His cottage, dissolving. The map was a fiction, a sketch of a world already reclaimed. A large droplet of brown water fell from the ceiling breach, landing with a cold splat asterisk near the edge of the map, instantly darkening the paper, blurring the ink of Cobbler's Wood into an indistinct smudge. Harold watched the stain spread, slowly consuming the drawn trees. He didn't move to stop it. He refolded the map carefully along its ancient creases, the damp patch cool against his palm, and returned it to the box. He closed the lid. The past was waterlogged, dissolving like the present. He left the box on the table, the twin pebbles inside. He returned to his chair, the cold deepening with every breath. The gnawing on the bean tin resumed from beneath the stairs, a persistent, metallic asterisk scritch. Chapter 39. The scritch asterisk became the soundtrack to the dissolving day. Harold sat, a statue carved from cold and resignation, listening to the rat work patiently at the tin's edge. The sound was insistent, a tiny, metallic heartbeat in the corpse of the cottage. Upstairs, the bowl overflowed again, adding a new, steady trickle down the stairs to join the main pool. The bulge around the ceiling breach sagged further, more plaster dust sifting down like fine snow. The chittering above was constant, a dry rustle of occupation. He thought of the lichen, the asterisk peltigera, the bitterness, the futility. The hollow cavern inside him yawned, a vast, cold space echoing the drip and the scritch. He pushed himself up, the movement sending shards of ice through his joints. He walked to the decaying moss heap. The fetid smell was overwhelming up close, sweetly rotten. He pushed aside the top layer of black sludge. Underneath, where the moss pressed against the cold stone of the hearth, it was merely sodden and dark, less decomposed. He scooped a handful of this cold, fibrous mat. It dripped brown water. He carried it back to his chair. He looked at it, this handful of decaying moor. He lifted it to his mouth. The smell filled his nostrils, cloying and fungal. He bit down. The texture was slimy, fibrous, clogging. The taste was overwhelmingly of damp earth, rotting vegetation, and a profound, fungal bitterness that made his gorge rise. He chewed, forcing his jaw to work, grinding the cold, gritty mass. It offered nothing but cold and disgust. He swallowed, the lump scraping down his throat. He took another bite, and another. He ate not for sustenance, but for the act itself, a perverse communion with the decay that was consuming his world. Each mouthful was a small surrender, a merging with the inevitable. The scritch asterisk paused, as if the rat was listening. Then it resumed, louder, more urgent. Chapter 40. Dusk thickened the gloom to near opacity. Harold had eaten half the cold, rotten moss from the hearth pile. It sat in his stomach like a ball of icy lead, radiating a profound, internal chill that matched the external cold seeping from the breached roof. His breath hung in ghostly plumes before his face, visible even in the dimness. The scritch asterisk beneath the stairs reached a fever pitch, a frantic, metallic scrabbling. Then, a sharp, triumphant ping. Silence. Harold didn't need to look. He knew. The fortress was breached. The sentinel was open. He heard the wet, sloppy sounds then, the rat feasting on cold butter beans inside the tin. The sound was obscenely loud in the dripping stillness. Other chittering sounds arose from beneath the stairs. More had come. They were feasting. His final redoubt, plundered. 2 tins left, unopened. For now, he felt nothing. No anger, no fear. Only the vast, cold emptiness, inside and out. He looked up at the ceiling breach. The sagging plaster groaned, a long, low sound of final protest. A larger section, this time the size of a tea tray, detached at one corner. It hung, dripping, suspended by a few stubborn laths. Water streamed through the gap. The chittering above intensified, excited. Harold closed his fist around nothing. The quartz pebbles were in the box on the table. He was empty. He was cold. He was the dripping water. He was the gnawed tin. He was the rotten moss in his gut. The hanging plaster gave one final, sodden sigh and collapsed, crashing onto the flooded flagstones below in a splash of brown water and shattered plaster. A rush of frigid, wet air and the sound of frantic, scrambling rats poured down from the roof cavity. The boundaries dissolved. The moor was inside. Harold Thistlewaite, a void wrapped in damp wool, sat in his chair, the icy water creeping towards his feet, the sound of consumption filling the drowning cottage. The rain, indifferent, continued its eternal, muffled roar on the roof. Chapter 41. The cascade of frigid air and wet rat stench that poured through the enlarged ceiling breach seemed to solidify the cold in Harold's bones, a final confirmation that the moor's dominion was absolute. The pool of brown water now lapped at the legs of his chair, icy tendrils soaking through the worn fabric of his trousers, the chill a sharp counterpoint to the leaden numbness spreading from the core of decayed moss in his stomach. Above, the excited skittering intensified. Rats poured over the splintered edges of the breach, dark shapes silhouetted against the lesser gloom of the roof cavity, their claws scrabbling on wet wood, their chittering a dry waterfall of sound that filled the ruined space. One, bolder than the rest, dropped with a soft plop asterisk into the expanding pool, sending ripples across the dark water that reflected the fragmented ceiling. It swam with swift, confident strokes towards the feast beneath the stairs, vanishing into the shadows where the wet, sloppy sounds of bean consumption continued unabated. Harold remained motionless, his gaze unfocused, fixed on the middle distance where water met darkness. The quartz pebbles in the cedarwood box on the table seemed impossibly distant, artifacts from another epoch. He was aware of his own breath, shallow and rapid, pluming white in the glacial air, and the deeper, more insidious cold leaching up from the flagstones through the soles of his boots, merging with the internal chill radiating from the ingested rot. The metallic screeching had ceased, only the sounds of consumption and dripping water remained, underscored by the eternal, muffled drumming of rain on the compromised roof. He closed his eyes, not to shut out the dissolution, but to dissolve into it, the boundaries of self blurring like ink in water. The chair beneath him, the damp wool scratching his neck, the icy water soaking his feet, these were merely sensations in the vast, wet entropy of Elmwood. Chapter 42. Dawn, if it came, was swallowed whole by the perpetual, waterlogged twilight. Harold opened his eyes to a world unchanged. The waterfall through the ceiling breach continued its brown torrent, the pool now deep enough to submerge the fallen plaster chunks entirely, creating a miniature, debris-strewn lagoon that covered 2/3 of the kitchen floor. The rats owned the space. He watched them now with detached curiosity, no longer as invaders but as features of the landscape, like the dripping moss or the sagging timbers. They swam across the pool with efficient strokes, their fur slick dark. They scaled the dresser legs with practiced ease, nosing the remaining 2 unopened bean tins, their claws scraping the metal with soft, insistent rasps. One bold creature perched atop the cedarwood box, its whiskers twitching as it sniffed the lid, perhaps detecting the faint, dry scent of old wood beneath the pervasive damp. Harold felt nothing, not fear, not revulsion, not even the hollow ache that had been hunger. The moss sat heavy and inert within him, a cold, dead weight. He shifted slightly in the chair, the icy water sloshing around his ankles. The movement disturbed a rat swimming nearby. It veered away with a splash, chittering indignantly. Harold's gaze drifted upwards. The breach gaped wider, the edges crumbling even as he watched, more plaster dust sifting down like dirty snow. The sagging tarred felt patch was clearly visible, waterlogged and black, bulging downwards like a decomposing organ. A section of roofing tile, dislodged perhaps by the constant rain or the frantic activity above, slid with a grating scrape and plunged through the hole, shattering on a submerged plaster chunk with a muffled crack. Shards of slate vanished beneath the brown water. The rats barely flinched. Harold blinked slowly. The cold was absolute now, a total saturation that reached beyond numbness into a state of pure sensory deprivation. He was the water. He was the cold stone shard sinking. He was the rat's indifferent chitter. Chapter 43. Time lost its final vestiges of meaning. Harold existed in a suspended state, a node of cold observation in the dissolving matrix of the cottage. He didn't sleep. He merely phased in and out of a hyper-awareness of the decay around him. The plink-plash asterisk of the waterfall merged with the slap-slap asterisk of rat tails propelling bodies through the pool, the frantic gnaw-scrabble asterisk from beneath the stairs where they worked on the second breach tin, the wet creep-prone asterisk of the overburdened roof timbers. The air hung thick with the stench of wet rodent, fungal decay, and the metallic tang of old water. The pool reached the base of the hearth. The decaying moss heap, half submerged, disintegrated further, releasing bubbles of foul-smelling gas that popped sluggishly on the surface. Harold watched a rat climb onto the seat of his rocking chair, its small, dark body dripping onto the worn wood. It sniffed the air, whiskers vibrating, its beady eyes reflecting the dim grey light as it turned its head towards him. It hesitated, nose twitching, perhaps sensing the utter lack of threat, the profound stillness that was less like life and more like cold stone. It ventured closer, its damp fur brushing against Harold's motionless hand where it rested on the chair arm. The touch was cold, light, alien. Harold didn't flinch. He didn't breathe. The rat sniffed his fingers, explored the coarse wool of his sleeve with its nose, then, finding nothing of interest, turned and leapt back into the water with a small splash. The contact left no mark, no sensation beyond the ambient cold. It was simply another interaction in the ecosystem of ruin, as insignificant as a water droplet landing on lichen. The cedarwood box remained untouched on the table, an island in the brown lake, the quartz pebbles inside forgotten relics of a lost solidity. Harold's focus narrowed to the immediate sensations: the icy water, the gnawing sounds, the weight of the moss inside him, the relentless drumming of the rain. Self dissolved into sensorium, a recording device for entropy. Chapter 44. A new sound insinuated itself into the symphony of decay, a deep, resonant cracking asterisk, not from the roof, but from below. It started as a low groan, felled more through the chair legs and the water than heard, a subterranean protest. Harold felt the vibration travel up his spine. The rats paused their activities, heads cocked, bodies tense. The crack asterisk came again, louder, sharper, like stone splitting under immense pressure. A jagged fissure appeared in the far kitchen wall, snaking upwards from the waterline through the damp plaster, widening visibly even as Harold watched. Dark, peaty water, smelling of the deep earth, began to seep through the crack, adding a fresh, mineral-rich stream to the existing brown pool. The flagstones beneath the water shifted with a grinding sound. One corner of the hearth sank visibly, tilting the decaying moss heap and sending a fresh wave of putrid bubbles to the surface. The rats panicked. They scrambled, splashing frantically, some diving for the hole beneath the stairs, others attempting to climb the walls, claws scrabbling uselessly on the wet plaster before falling back into the water with high-pitched squeals. The dresser wobbled precariously as the floor beneath it subsided. The cedarwood box slid sideways, teetered on the edge of the table, then tumbled into the deepening pool with a soft splash, disappearing instantly beneath the turbid surface. Harold felt the chair lurch beneath him as the flagstones settled unevenly. The icy water rose, now reaching his calves. The deep cracking asterisk continued, a series of percussive booms echoing up from the waterlogged earth beneath the cottage foundations. The ceiling breach seemed to widen in response, more plaster slumping into the pool, the sagging roof timbers groaning like a dying beast. The boundary between cottage and moor dissolved completely. It was no longer an invasion, but a collapse into unity. The cold intensified, sharpened by the influx of groundwater from the deep earth. Harold remained seated, water rising, the vibrations of the splitting world resonating through his frame. He was the cracking stone. He was the seeping peat. He was the terrified rat squeal swallowed by the flood. Chapter 45. The water reached Harold's thighs, a cold so profound it burned, a paradoxical fire of absolute zero leaching the last vestiges of warmth from his core. The deep earth cracking asterisk became a continuous, grinding roar, the sound of continents shifting on a microscopic scale. The far wall fissure gaped like a dark mouth, vomiting thick, peaty sludge that swirled into the pool, turning the water viscous and black. The dresser tilted further, its legs sinking into the liquefying floor, the remaining bean tins sliding off the shelf to vanish with soft asterisk glugs asterisk beneath the surface. Rats swam desperately, their chittering drowned by the subterranean thunder and the relentless rain hammering the failing roof. One timbers supporting the ceiling breach gave way with a splintering shriek, dropping a cascade of broken tiles, sodden felt, and matted debris into the water near Harold. The splash drenched him, icy water shocking his face, running down his neck inside his layers. He didn't move. He blinked, water dripping from his lashes. The cold was all-encompassing now, a total immersion that had passed beyond pain into a state of pure, crystalline stillness. He looked down at the black water swirling around his waist. The cedarwood box was gone, the quartz pebbles returned to the element that had birthed them. The moss inside him was inert, a fossil in the making. His breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, each plume instantly dissolving in the frigid air. He lifted a hand, slowly, with immense effort, as if moving stone. He watched the black water stream from his fingers, watched the pale, wrinkled skin, the blue-tinged nails. It was a hand, yet not his. Merely an object suspended in the dissolving world. The chair shifted violently beneath him as another section of floor subsided. He felt himself tilting, the icy water rising to his chest, then his neck. The roaring of the earth and the rain filled his ears, a final, deafening hymn. He took one last, shallow breath of air thick with rotten wet fur. Then the dark, peaty water closed over his head. There was no struggle, only the final, seamless merging. The cold extinguished the last spark of observation. Harold Thistlewaite ceased. The cottage, the moor, the endless rain, continued their slow, inevitable return to the elements, indifferent to the silence where a man had been. The surface of the black water settled, reflecting only the ragged hole in the roof and the relentless, weeping grey sky beyond. Chapter 46. The black water settled into a new equilibrium, a still, peat dark mirror reflecting the ragged wound in the roof and the perpetual, weeping grey of the sky. Harold Thistlewaite was gone, dissolved into the cold, mineral-rich broth that had once been his kitchen floor. The rats, after the initial panic subsided, adapted. The torrent from the ceiling breach became a steady, brown waterfall feeding the pool, which now filled the cottage's ground floor to a depth of nearly 3 feet, lapping against the sagging staircase, submerging the cold hearth, and rising halfway up the walls. The deep earth cracking had ceased, leaving the cottage tilted, its foundations compromised, but temporarily stable in its new, waterlogged posture. The colony thrived. They swam with confident strokes, their sleek bodies gliding through the murk, diving to retrieve submerged treasures, a sodden crust of bread, a bloated potato eye, the smooth white quartz pebble from the cedarwood box, discarded after a brief, curious gnawing found it unpalatable and unyielding. They nested in the relative dryness of the upper floor, dragging shreds of mildewed blanket and damp wool from the bed through the flooded lower level, their chittering echoing down the stairwell, a constant, dry rustle against the backdrop of dripping water. The dresser, tilted at a drunken angle, became an island. Rats scaled it, using it as a lookout, a place to groom damp fur, or to gnaw experimentally on the water-swollen wood. The remaining unopened bean tin had rolled into a dark corner near the submerged cupboard, forgotten for now. The dominant sound was the asterisk plink plash asterisk of the waterfall, the slap slap asterisk of rodent tails propelling bodies through the water, and the eternal, muffled drumming of the rain on the roof, a rhythm as unchanging as the grey light. Chapter 47. Seasons blurred in the drowned cottage. The rain persisted, though its character shifted. The drumming downpour sometimes softened to a persistent, misting drizzle that seemed to seep through the very walls, adding its own fine moisture to the already saturated air within. Other times, it returned with a vengeance, hammering the remaining roof tiles, sending fresh cascades through the ceiling breach, churning the dark pool into miniature waves that slapped against the tilting walls. Frost, when it came, was a fleeting visitor. Thin, fragile skins of ice formed overnight on the surface of the still water near the edges of the room, only to shatter and dissolve with the first weak light or the splash of a rat diving for submerged morsels. The cold deepened, sharper than before, biting into the stone and timber, but the water, surprisingly, retained a degree of residual earth warmth, preventing a complete freeze. The rats grew thicker fur, their movements perhaps a fraction slower in the frigid water, but no less industrious. They explored every submerged crevice, finding little sustenance but maintaining their territory. The walls wept continuously. Plaster, long saturated, sloughed off in thick, sodden sheets below the waterline, revealing the rough stone and timber lath beneath, already furred with a pale, fuzzy mold that fed on the constant damp. Above the waterline, dark stains spread like ink blots, the wallpaper, what remained, hanging in damp, peeling shrouds. The smell evolved, less of immediate rot now, more of deep, wet earth, stagnant water, and the pervasive, musky odor of the rodent colony. The waterfalls blink plash remained the metronome, the rats chittering the unchanging melody, the rain the eternal drone. Time, unmarked, flowed like the water itself, slow, cold, and directionless. Chapter 48. The tilted cottage settled further into the embrace of the waterlogged earth. The pool, fed by the sealing waterfall and the slow seepage from the cracked foundations, maintained its level, a dark, still eye reflecting the decaying interior. Vegetation, emboldened by the dissolution of boundaries, began its silent invasion. First came the algae. A thin, greenish scum formed on the surface of the water near the edges, fed by the faint, diffused light filtering through the streaming window and the hole in the roof. Then, moss spores, carried on the damp air or perhaps by the rats themselves, found purchase. Vibrant green brine moss began to colonize the damp plaster above the waterline, particularly on the north-facing wall, its tiny, velvety cushions spreading slowly over the stains. Near the submerged base of the staircase, where debris offered a foothold, the first rubbery, grey-green lobes of Peltigera canina appeared, the dog lichen reclaiming the interior stone, indifferent to the history of human habitation. The rats navigated around these new growths, sometimes pausing to sniff at the moss or lick moisture from the lichen, but finding no sustenance, moved on. Their colony seemed stable, the chittering a constant background hum. They had excavated tunnels in the sodden insulation within the walls, creating dry-ish runs between the flooded lower floor and their nesting areas above. The waterfall continued its patient work, eroding the edges of the ceiling breach, widening it imperceptibly with each passing day, each drop of brown water adding its minuscule contribution to the dissolution. A family of spiders, sensing the abundance of moisture and insects drawn by the decay, spun intricate, glistening webs in the high corners near the roof hole, their silken architectures trembling with each gust of damp wind that sighed through the opening. The cottage was no longer dying, it was transforming, becoming a new ecosystem, wet, dark, and ruled by the patient persistence of moss, lichen, water, and rats. Chapter 49. Years flowed like the brown water through the ceiling breach, measured only in layers of moss thickening on the walls, in lichen colonies expanding across submerged stones, and in the generations of rats that were born, thrived, and died within the drowned shell. The cottage slumped further. The tilting dresser finally succumbed, toppling with a slow, watery groan one rain-sodden night, disappearing entirely beneath the dark surface, leaving only bubbles rising to mark its grave. The staircase, undermined by rot and the constant water, sagged dramatically in the middle, its lower steps completely submerged, the upper ones treacherous and slick. The hole in the roof was vast now, a ragged moor open to the sky, allowing more than just rain to enter. Wind sighed constantly through it, stirring the surface of the pool, carrying leaves and twigs that floated for a time before waterlogging and sinking. Snow, on rare occasions, dusted the edges of the hole and the high, crumbling walls before melting into the general dampness. Birds began to notice the sheltered cavity. First, bold sparrows darted in, perched on exposed, rotting rafters, chirping briefly before fleeing the oppressive gloom and the musky rat smell. Then, a pair of jackdaws investigated, their sharp calls echoing in the cavernous space. They found the high ledges near the roof hole suitable. Over time, they began carrying twigs and dry grass, a scarce commodity in the perpetually wet moor, building a messy nest in the crook of a collapsing beam, high above the dark water and the rustling domain of the rats below. Their raucous cries added a new, harsh counterpoint to the blink plash of water and the dry chittering. The pool itself grew murkier, layered with centuries of silt, decaying plant matter, and the inevitable detritus of the rat colony. The submerged world became a realm of blind things, water beetles, pale, eyeless crustaceans finding niches in the rotting wood, and thick, anaerobic bacteria working in the deep, lightless sediment. The cottage was no longer a human place. It was a wet, dark cavity in the landscape, a pocket of still water and slow decay, slowly being digested by the patient moor. Chapter 50. The process was glacial, inevitable. The walls, burdened by saturated earth pressing in from outside and the weight of the crumbling roof, began to bow inward more noticeably. Stone shifted against stone with low, grinding groans that echoed infrequently in the watery space. Large sections of plaster fell infrequently now, with heavy splashes, because so little remained above the waterline. The jackdaw nest, precariously perched, was abandoned after a season, perhaps due to the rising damp, the rats, or the unsettling groans of the structure. The discarded twigs floated on the dark surface for months before sinking. The waterfall from the ceiling slowed as the roof's remaining structure sagged further, channeling less water. The primary source became seepage, dark, peaty water oozing continuously through the cracked foundation stones, silently replenishing the pool. The algae bloomed thicker in patches where weak light penetrated, forming dull green mats. The moss thrived, covering most of the exposed stone and timber above the water in a thick, velveteen pelt of deep green. The Peltigera asterisk lichen spread its leathery lobes across the lower, frequently submerged stones, impervious to the dark water. The rat colony persisted, though perhaps diminished, their chittering a fainter rustle in the vast, dripping space. They were ghosts in their own domain, navigating the familiar submerged pathways, feeding on whatever the dark water and decaying structure yielded, waterlogged insects, tender rootlets probing from outside, perhaps even their own young in lean times. The defining sound was the drip, not the waterfall, but the countless individual drops falling from the moss-thickened rafters, from the edges of lichen colonies, from the tips of exposed, rotting laths, a slow, cold rain falling perpetually onto the black mirror of the pool. Each asterisk plink asterisk sent out perfect, expanding ripples that crossed and recrossed the surface, intersecting, dissolving, only to be replaced by the next, and the next, in an endless, hypnotic dance of dissolution. The cottage was a water-filled bell jar slowly cracking under pressure, a forgotten pocket of stillness in the weeping moor, its only testament the patient, unchanging rhythm of water falling into water, marking time until the final, silent collapse into the earth.